Good afternoon. My name is Emer. As Sarah said, I'm the Director of Cloud Solutions Integration and Performance at Avaya, and I am delighted to welcome you to today's discussion, Allyship in Action, Fostering Innovation and Creativity Through Diversity of Thought. So today we're going to explore how embracing diverse perspectives is just not just a moral imperative, but also a catalyst for innovation and growth. So today, with our distinguished panellists, we will delve into how they practice allyship, overcome challenges, and strategically leverage diversity to drive creativity and innovation across their organisations. So I'll just give you a brief introduction to each of our panellists. First off, we have Gillian McDwyer, Vice President of Customer Success and Services at Genesys, running a global team focused on digital and AI solutions. Liam is the Genesys Ireland Executive Sponsor for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, and recently is the recipient of a Worldwide Leadership Award, Leading with Empathy and Action. Welcome, Liam. We also have Lorna Martyn, Ireland Regional Chair and Senior Vice President of Fidelity Investments. So Lorna's approach to diversity and inclusion is deeply integrated with Fidelity's core mission to create an environment where every voice is heard and valued, driving forward-thinking solutions across their operations. Last year Lorna was the inaugural recipient of the American Chamber of Commerce Global Leadership Award, and also Technology Ireland named her Person of the Year Award for her contribution to diversity and inclusion across the industry. Welcome, Lorna. Next we have Gillian Harfort, Country Executive of the 30% Club Ireland. So Gillian is a keen advocate for gender diversity across businesses and executive committees and boards. So through her efforts, the 30% Club has made significant strides in increasing female representation at leadership roles across industries. Welcome, Gillian. And finally, we have Laura Mackin, Liberty IT. So as Director for Communications and Marketing, Laura is passionate about creating inclusive employee and brand connections. And Laura is a founding member of Pride at Liberty IT, is a Liberty Women in Technology mentor, and is also an active member of the Northern Ireland Business Group working with Pride. Welcome, Laura. So with such a diverse panel, I'm sure that our discussion today will be rewarding and inspirational. So Liam, I think you drew the short straw for the first question. I'll direct it to yourself. How does your organisation define allyship, practice allyship, and what impact has that made within your organisation, particularly with regard to innovation and creativity? It's a long question. Three questions in one.
Yeah, I think allyship, in general, I'm the DEI sponsor for the site, 450 people in Galway here currently. Extremely diverse and multicultural workforce, as you can imagine. I think when I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's a more mature construct. So if an organisation wants to deploy strategies and policies, you can go out and benchmark and get a couple of frameworks, how to set up the DEI councils, chapters, employee resource groups. I think allyship is a little newer and a little more nuanced, right? It's not as easy to go find a playbook for how to be a good ally. And I think there's some overlap with traditional coaching and mentoring as well. But coaching and mentoring, tends to be targeted at an individual or a particular outcome. So how do I mentor a team to do X? How do I help an individual, for a career progression, for example? Whereas allyship, in preparation for this, I looked up some definitions. So one that I like is allyship is the effort at advancing the interests of a minority group. So it's not targeted to the individual or to an outcome. It's more about elevating awareness and showing support in the collaboration of those groups. And I think two takeaways from a personal note I would have had at Genesys is, to be an ally, you don't have to be a subject matter expert. You don't have to know everything about the community or the topic that you're providing support for. That's not why you're needed. You're needed to work with that group, to understand their needs and to see where you can plug in and help using your skills or the network or your connections.
Excellent.
And I think the final piece is, often it's enough just to show up. Go to the group, go to the coffee mornings, go to the cinema nights.
Yeah.
Just be there as a membership leadership team and show that you're there and present and not just talking about what I should be doing it.
Excellent, thanks. Excellent answer. Laura, could I perhaps direct the same question to yourself in terms of Liberty IT's initiatives and which ones have been the most impactful or some examples within your organisation?
Sure. I think for us, I'm leaning actually into a few of the fundamentals of allyship because I've heard it this morning. The professor opened this morning talking about value alignment. He talked about creating a sense of belonging. We talked today in our sessions about challenging bias and about, here we are, learning and sharing from one another. For me and for our team at Liberty, that's really the fundamentals of allyship. But how do we make that real? We have invested in training and in workshops to enhance our learning professionally and from a business point of view in things like microaggressions, challenging the bias, growth mindset. However, really where we are seeing the biggest impact of where we're truly winning hearts and minds and really driving impact is through our employee resource groups or ERGs. One great example is actually very local here to Galway. We are just coming up on our first anniversary of having an office in Galway, and when we were thinking about where to expand our business to across Ireland, Galway for us was the clear winner, and it was two things. It was the fact that we had immense talent here, of which we've seen plenty of over the course of AtlanTec. But it was actually the sense of community, the real unique sense of community that Galway has here. And it is something that they welcome you to and into with open arms, but that they very much hold you accountable to participate and be active in. Within our ERGs, our STEM group is partnering with our technical leaders. We have partnered with Ideas Lab here at the university, with Code First, and we're really looking for opportunities where we can engage our teams, share that knowledge in terms of our innovation frameworks, in terms of our software and our architecture frameworks, to be able to inspire. So ultimately, I guess the impact that we have seen is much, much larger than just how allyship and active, consistent allyship can impact engagement across an organisation. But actually, if we're doing it right, if we're doing it really truthfully, we can expand that right out to impact our local communities as well.
Excellent. So I suppose, Lorna, with all of the recognition you and Fidelity have received around diversity and inclusion initiatives, which ones within your own organisation would you say have been the most impactful? But also, I'd be interested in hearing what challenges has your organisation experienced in those initiatives, rolling out those initiatives, and how have you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I think when you work for a company that has over 75,000 people globally, that brings lots of challenges because you're dealing with, much diversity of thought, right? So it brings challenges, but it also brings opportunities. And like what we've just heard, probably Fidelity started off with, establishing the employee resource groups and so forth. But I think allyship is certainly a newer term. I think the really important thing that I would say about allyship is it's not a self-professed label, and a lot of people, you start seeing pronouns out there and on Zoom, and they're like, she, her, hers, ally, and that makes me cringe, because I think ultimately, it's like anything from a cultural perspective. It's how you make people feel, right? So at Fidelity, I suppose what we would have focused on is, looking at putting the right structures in place, and it's not just about, layering on and saying, we're going to set up a number of employee resource groups. It's really looking very deeply in terms of your culture. So it comes back to ultimately what drives your culture. So, if I think about our mission statement at Fidelity, it's really about, improving the financial outcomes of our customers, right? So there's a business imperative in terms of how we think about inclusion and diversity, and I would always say inclusion comes before diversity, because with inclusion that brings diversity into an organisation. It sustains diversity in an organisation, and what we think very strongly about is how do you think about layering that into everything that we do? What's the imperative? What's the strategy look like? And then I suppose in recent years, we have to think about the different levels of maturity in the thinking across the globe. So bringing some, I suppose, centralised thoughts that really has top-down support. So I think about things like, we have an inclusive language guide, right? And that's something that, English is our lingua franca of the organisation, so that's something that, lots of our associates may not be their first language, so helping them understand that. And I suppose from an Ireland perspective, one thing we really focused on was, how do you know you're doing the right thing? So, we've worked with the Irish Centre for Diversity. They have a benchmark, which is called the Investors in Diversity Benchmark. And we've gone through the 3 phases of that. There's a bronze certification, which kind of looks at your internal structures. Then there's a silver that looks at what do your associates think. So what you're doing is that, what you say, does it reflect in terms of your actions and your deeds and how you lead the organisation? And then the third piece of it is, how does the outside ecosystem look at you? And that's everything from other companies to, companies that you engage with, to suppliers and so forth. And, in the last year we've achieved that benchmark. Now, that's not an end game. That's a starting point that will evolve over time. So, some of those challenges that we would face as a large organisation is you have to educate a huge number of people. And we would have started with some of the simple things like, looking at unconscious bias. And we very quickly flipped that to looking at conscious inclusion. So it's back to where I started. I think everything starts with inclusion, because if you don't have inclusion, you don't have diversity. If you don't have diversity, there's really no need for allyship. And if you don't have the right structures in place, that doesn't sustain over time.
Okay. Yeah, no, I totally agree about starting with inclusivity. Certainly at Avaya, as part of the ERG structure, we try to host those inclusive talks and get the dialogue open and going to understand the different perspectives that we're working with. Gillian, can I ask from across industries, are you seeing the same kind of challenges, and what kind of initiatives are you seeing being most successful across industries?
Thank you. We're really lucky in Ireland that we have been looking at this agenda for quite some time. The 30% Club is in 20 chapters around the world, and we don't see the same progress elsewhere. But it's still a relatively new agenda. 10 years ago, we weren't talking about this in Ireland. Now we are. In terms of some of the challenges, the first thing is many organisations are finding this is quite a challenge to do. 10 years ago, there was almost the idea, if we get our recruitment right, and if we have some flag and cupcake days, everything will change. And as we've seen here from some of the great examples we've had already, that hasn't been the case. So Irish companies have realised that to do this properly, you have to put it on a proper footing. It is about culture, it is about policy, it is about process, it is about experience. And actually we found in the first couple of years, a lot of Irish companies felt they were doing all the right things, but the dial wasn't changing. Okay? So what we are starting to see organisations talking about now is the idea of, yes, diversity gives you the balance in your workforce. Inclusion means the voices are heard, but you have to focus on roles of influence, because there is no value having all your diversity just in one part of the organisation. Probably the second thing that we're seeing, and again, some of the early adopters love the idea of diversity and inclusion and allyship because they could see a competitive advantage. They realised very quickly that if they were the only ones investing in this competitive advantage, they just became feeders for everybody else. So what we're now seeing, particularly positive in Ireland, is the idea of collaboration. How do companies come together with groups like the 30% Club, Connecting Women in Technology, and sharing in a way where they might compete for products and services and customers, but they'll collaborate in terms of building talent. We're really starting to see the importance of collaboration between industry and academia and industry and government. So many initiatives where organisations are saying, we want diversity, but it doesn't exist in the pipeline. So how do we get involved in STEM initiatives in school? And the third thing that we're seeing is that initial progress is easily won, but very easily lost. Particularly in senior roles, and this is where in Ireland we're now starting to talk about the gender power gap. So if I give you an example, 2 years ago Ireland was in the top quartile in the EU in terms of gender balance in CEO positions in listed companies. We were making what we thought was great progress. And 3 weeks ago, Ireland became one of just 2 countries in the EU that had no female CEOs on listed companies. And it just happened so easily and so quickly. And then we look at CSO data. Again, we're fortunate in Ireland, the government has now come behind collecting data, and the averages look great. But when you dial under the numbers, if we look at senior executives across companies in Ireland, 20% of companies operating out of Ireland have no women in their executive teams. And when I talk about gender, everybody says, well, why don't you talk about everything else? Gender is a majority issue, not a minority issue. And if we get gender right, it brings in so many different facets. But if we can't get gender right, and we think about some of the topics that have been covered this morning, like Gen AI, even the example this morning of, I'll put my hand up and a Cisco system will know that we're in agreement. If I'm from a culture or from a background where we don't do hand gestures, will I get left out, and will the end product for the customer be less than it could be because we haven't had diversity of thought in the room and we haven't had diversity of innovation in the room? But these are issues that we're seeing consistently across every sector, across every industry within the sector. It's not easy. You take your eye off the ball and it changes very quickly, and you can't do it by yourself. It really needs collaboration in terms of pipeline for Ireland.
Okay, so really thought-provoking input there. I suppose, what strategic initiatives looking ahead then do companies need to look to employ to, I guess, restore some of that diversity of thought back into their organisation? So I'll kick off myself again.
Well, I keep going. And again, we're seeing similarities, and some of the examples are the ones that we've heard already. You know, thinking about training, that is much more about inclusivity rather than just raising awareness. But if I look at it more strategically, the types of things that we are seeing across the more progressive organisations, and I say this as a HR person for 40 years before I started to do this, we're starting to see the conversation moving out of HR and into the boardroom. Because companies that see this as a HR responsibility are not driving real change. The real change has to come from the top. It has to come from the chair. It has to come from the CEO. Now, luckily, things like gender pay gap reporting and pay transparency are putting an onus on boards and CEO teams to think about it. But the more progressive companies are saying, this is really important to our business and this is part of our culture. The second thing we're seeing is it being much more embedded into the business agenda. From a customer's perspective, from procurement, if you go in and have a conversation with professional services firms, they will not go in and make a pitch in the procurement process anymore without thinking about diversity in their presentation team. Because if they don't have diversity, they won't win the contract. We're seeing it in customer advertising. Lidl have a fabulous campaign at the moment about breaking the glass. Allianz have a great campaign at the moment around Stop the Drop in Sport. So it's becoming much more part of the business agenda rather than just HR. And finally, we're seeing great conversations moving from fixing people, fixing the underrepresented to fit in, and instead the conversation is about how are we changing the system so that everybody can thrive. Because if you only focus on underrepresented groups, overrepresented groups can start to feel very worried and left out. So how do we change the system, not the people?
Excellent, thank you. So I just want to open that question out to any of the other panelists in terms of some strategies that you're looking to build on your existing diversity and inclusion initiatives to further encourage innovation and diversity of thought.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Gillian has just said, and there's probably two things that we've done at Fidelity and continue to do. So totally agree taking it out of the HR space. So we actually appointed a head of diversity and inclusion a number of years ago, and that was an independent voice that sat at the board table. We had great sponsorship from the top. So we're a privately owned company, so we're kind of lucky we can kind of do some things that maybe in other companies where you're answerable to the shareholder, it can be a little bit more challenging, but it's something that's really, really important for our CEO. And one of the things that came out of that, and we talked about gender pay gap reporting, we started producing a diversity report, a publicly displayed one, and that was really to put pressure on, let's be very honest about what the situation is, but also be very honest in terms of what are the initiatives and how to improve over time. And I think it's a real breath of fresh air when you start seeing it. And a lot of the progressive big companies are doing that now. I think the other thing that's back to Gillian's point, so we're a very, very broad portfolio company, but in the same way as your green credentials are important, your D&I credentials are really important in terms of winning business. And I think anything that becomes a business imperative gets that attention at the boardroom level. And I think that's something that we see it all the time. So I see a couple of my colleagues in the front row there that work in our workplace investing business. And essentially what we're doing is managing the pension funds and the benefits for lots of other companies across the globe. And if Fidelity's culture is not, it's not aligned with their culture, you're never going to win that business. So I think it's really about having that sponsorship at the top of the house. So you can do lots of things organically. It's great to have groups within companies, but they don't have the voice to actually drive the change. So you have to get that top down as well as leveraging your bottom up. And I think you have to be really honest about the data. They will be the kind of two big things I would say.
Thank you. That leads me into my next question, and I'll direct this to yourself, Gillian. What would be your one takeaway action or call to arms to this audience from today's discussion, or even from your own experiences?
Yeah, I think going back to Lorna's point about bottom up, I think we talked about leadership and top-down frameworks. I think one of the lessons I've learned in the last 2 years as we grew the site was that you tend to get the same people participating in the ERGs and in the sports and social. And the organisation recognises that that's key to our culture, it's key to talent acquisition, it's key to retaining talent. Yet many of our performance systems are based on task items or outcome-based things that don't account for that. So there's a couple of terms around that. One is non-promoted work that these people are doing, and in some cases it can even lean into they're worried about their promotable work and the time impact maybe. And some great research in the University Business School here, that's actually called organizational citizenship behavior, where you have these great champs, but they're giving nearly too much of themselves. So I think as an organization and leadership team, my takeaway would be, we need to be intentional about recognizing that work, be intentional about measuring it, and be intentional about rewarding those people.
And fully endorse that from my own experiences as well. There is a lot of unrecognised effort that goes on behind the scenes to have those events, set up those talks and etc. So it is important to recognise the individuals who contribute to trying to make that organisational workplace a more inclusive culture. Laura, what would your call to action be to the audience? to build on what was said already.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. You know, the recognition piece is really, really important. You know, I think hopefully what we've chatted about today is that, you know, DEI is no longer nice to have. These are business imperatives, you know, and I think what I would say is continue to invest time and money in this area, because it really can make huge strides in terms of culture and enhancing that diversity and leaning into really trying to drive real change in the statistics, startling statistics that you give us today. But also, as someone who's in quite a few ERG groups, it's a heck of a lot of fun. And it's a great way to build your network and a great way to build new friends, particularly as we are in a hybrid first culture now, and that's really difficult. So going back to that very first point about sense of belonging, this really does require your time and your investment.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to check before we wrap up, is there any questions from the audience that anybody wanted to ask on this topic? Nope, okay, thanks. So I just wanted to wrap up by saying I want to wish each of our panellists a really heartfelt thank you for your expertise and your energy and enthusiasm for this subject. I personally found it very enriching and enlightening with, as you said, some stark statistics. And I think the call to action is very clear that in organisations we need to recognise the importance of this and to support those individuals and recognise those individuals who are driving this. So once again, thank you to each of our panellists and thank you for your time.